The scent of war hung over Elm Street every morning by 4 a.m. It was a deceptively gentle war, waged with cinnamon and butter, with the crisp, flaky promise of a perfect crust and the slow, sweet surrender of caramelized fruit. On one side of the cobblestone street stood the Gable Bakery and Pie Shop, a pristine establishment of whitewashed wood and cheerful blue gingham. Its windows gleamed, and the scent that wafted from its doors was one of classic, unadulterated Americana: robust apple, straightforward cherry, honest pumpkin. On the other side, glaring defiantly, was Mortimer's Pies, a building of dark, aged brick and a deep green awning. Its aroma was bolder, more complex, a hint of black pepper in the strawberry rhubarb, a daring splash of bourbon in the pecan, the earthy whisper of salted caramel in a traditional apple. It was the scent of tradition, yes, but tradition that had been kicked up a notch, dusted with rebellion. Elara Gable stood at the counter of her family's shop, her hands wrist-deep in flour. At 27, she had the posture of a queen and the weary eyes of a veteran. She meticulously crimped the edge of a lattice-top peach pie, her movements precise, economical. Each perfect fold was a brick in the wall that had protected the Gable legacy for 3 generations. She could feel the weight of that legacy in her shoulders, a constant, low-grade ache. Through the spotless window, she saw the lights flick on across the street, and her jaw tightened. The enemy was awake. Liam Mortimer slammed the heavy oak door of his shop shut, the bell overhead jangling a protest. He ran a hand through his already disheveled dark hair and surveyed his kingdom of controlled chaos. Sacks of flour were stacked like sandbags, and bowls of various fillings sat on every available surface, a vibrant mosaic of potential. At 28, Liam carried the Mortimer name not as a crown, but as a chain. He was an artist trapped in a baker's apron, his soul yearning to paint with saffron and cardamom, while his father's ghost demanded he stick to the tried-and-true Mortimer recipes. The ones that were just eccentric enough to be legendary, but not so much as to be alienating. He glanced across the street, his gaze immediately finding Elara's silhouette. She was a statue of efficiency, a portrait of cold perfection. He remembered, with a painful clarity that surprised him, a time when she wasn't the enemy. A childhood memory, hazy and golden, of sharing a stolen slice of blackberry pie behind the town church, their faces smeared with purple juice, laughing about something long forgotten. That was before the feud had solidified in their teenage years, becoming a chasm carved by parental expectation and a long-forgotten argument over a blue ribbon at the state fair 50 years ago. The day began as they all did. The first customers of Elm Street, tourists mostly, would hesitate on the cobblestones, torn between the comforting allure of the Gable and the intriguing mystery of Mortimer's. They would often split up, families dividing along cautious and adventurous lines, and reunite later to compare their spoils. It was a cold war with delicious casualties. Elara served Mrs. Higgins her weekly order of sugar-free apple with a brittle smile. "Another beautiful day, Elara," the old woman chirped. "Every day is beautiful when you have pie, Mrs. Higgins," Elara replied, the line as rehearsed as her pie crust recipe. Her eyes, however, flickered back to the window, to where Liam was now hauling a crate of fresh cherries from a local farm. He moved with a loose-limbed grace that irritated her. It suggested a lack of seriousness, a disregard for the gravity of their profession. Liam, for his part, was trying out a new filling. He macerated the cherries with not just sugar, but a touch of balsamic vinegar and a single, finely chopped fresh rosemary sprig. It was a risk. His father would have called it heresy. He caught Elara watching him through her window, her expression one of thinly veiled disdain. He gave her a mock salute with a wooden spoon. She turned away, her back ramrod straight. The feud was their inheritance, a cage built by their grandparents and meticulously maintained by their parents. Arthur Gable, Elara's father, had his first heart attack behind this very counter, his final words reportedly being, "Don't you dare let the Mortimers get the corner property." Alastair Mortimer, Liam's father, had passed a year later, his last piece of advice a gruff: "A Gable pie is all show, no soul, son. Remember that." Now, the children were left to guard the ruins of a battlefield they'd never chosen to fight on. Elara felt the responsibility like a physical weight. It was her duty, her birthright, her prison. Liam felt it as a stifling blanket, smothering his creativity, his very identity. They were 2 satellites locked in a perpetual, silent orbit of resentment, their paths dictated by a gravity of animosity they no longer understood but were powerless to escape. The epicenter of the feud, the event that poured gasoline on the smoldering embers each year, was the Summer Harvest Festival. The entire town of Oakhaven gathered in the main square for music, games, and most importantly, the pie competition. The coveted Golden Crust Award wasn't just a piece of polished brass. It was a year's worth of bragging rights, a surge in business, and validation of an entire family's existence. This year's festival dawned bright and hot. The square was a riot of color and sound, but for Elara and Liam, the world had shrunk to the two judging tables at the far end, under the ancient oak tree. Elara presented her masterpiece, a Gable Supreme apple pie. The crust was so golden it seemed to generate its own light, the lattice top woven with impossible precision. The filling was a secret blend of 5 apple varieties, each cooked to a distinct texture that created a symphony in the mouth. It was safe. It was perfect. It was everything a Gable pie was supposed to be. Liam carried his entry with a confident swagger that belied the knot in his stomach. His pie was a cherry balsamic rosemary noir. The crust was rugged, dusted with coarse sugar. It looked interesting. The judges, a panel of town dignitaries and a food critic from the state capital, sampled Elara's pie first. The murmurs of approval were polite, reverent even. "A classic," the mayor said, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. "Flawless execution." Then they turned to Liam's. They cut into it. The filling was a deep, dark crimson. The aroma that rose was complex, unsettlingly savory next to the straightforward sweetness of Elara's. The head judge, Mrs. Abernathy, a woman whose face was permanently set in a frown of mild disapproval, took a tentative bite. Her eyebrows shot up. She took another. The other judges followed suit. A silent communication passed between them. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. He saw Elara watching, her arms crossed, a small, confident smile playing on her lips. She already had the speech prepared in her head, the gracious winner's acceptance that would subtly underscore the Mortimer's lack of respect for tradition. The head judge cleared her throat. "The decision this year is unprecedented. After much deliberation, we have a tie. The Golden Crust Award is shared between the Gable Bakery for classic perfection and Mortimer's Pies for daring innovation." A stunned silence fell over the crowd, followed by a wave of confused applause. A tie. It was the worst possible outcome. For Elara, it was an insult. To be placed on the same level as Liam's chaotic, rule-breaking concoction was to devalue generations of Gable discipline. For Liam, it was a hollow victory. They hadn't truly embraced his innovation. They'd merely placated it, balancing it against the safety of the Gable standard. They were forced to stand together for a photograph, each holding one handle of the award. The smile Elara plastered on her face felt like a crack in porcelain. Liam's grin was a tight, frustrated slash. "Congratulations," Elara hissed through her teeth as the camera flashed. "Likewise," Liam ground out. "Your pie was predictably excellent, and yours was unexpectedly peculiar." Their hands brushed as they awkwardly tried to release the award at the same time. A jolt, sharp and entirely unwelcome, shot up Elara's arm. She snatched her hand back as if burned. Liam's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of the same surprise in their depths. For a single fleeting second, the noise of the festival faded, and they were just two people, trapped. Then the moment shattered. Elara turned on her heel and marched back to her family's stall, the shared award feeling like a lead weight in her hand. The feud had not been cooled by the tie, it had been superheated. The battlefield had just been reset, and the lines were more deeply drawn than ever. The stalemate of the Golden Crust Award festered for weeks. The animosity was no longer a background hum. It was a constant, grating screech. Elara threw herself into her work with a manic intensity, developing a new blueberry lemon zest pie that was so bright and cheerful it felt like a lie. Liam, frustrated and blocked, started and abandoned a dozen new ideas, his kitchen littered with the failed experiments of chocolate beetroot and peach-time creations that tasted either of dirt or perfume. The breaking point, as it often is, arrived not with a bang, but with a sputter and a cloud of white flour. It was a Tuesday, the quietest day of the week. Elara was alone in the Gable shop, inventorying the pantry. Liam was across the street, attempting to deconstruct a key lime pie. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. The sky turned a bruised purple, and rain fell in solid, relentless sheets. A crack of thunder, deafeningly close, was followed by a flicker of lights in both shops. Then another louder crack, the sound of a transformer exploding somewhere down the line. And both shops, along with the entire block, were plunged into an inky, silent blackness. Elara froze in the dark, her hand still on a sack of sugar. The hum of the refrigerators, the glow of the ovens, the soft background music, all gone. The only sound was the drumming of rain on the roof. This was a disaster. The Gable power backup was ancient and had failed 6 months ago. Her father had kept meaning to replace it. Without refrigeration, her entire stock of pre-made fillings and delicate butter-based crusts would be ruined by morning. A loss they could not afford. Swearing under her breath, she fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight to navigate to the front door. She looked out at the pitch-black street. And then she saw it. A faint, warm, flickering light emanating from Mortimer's. A generator. Of course, the reckless Mortimers, with their haphazard wiring and DIY ethos, had a functioning gas generator. A war waged inside her. Pride versus pragmatism. The feud versus financial ruin. Swallowing a lump of humiliation that felt like a whole, uncooked pie, she pulled her coat over her head, unlocked the door, and dashed across the rain-swept street. She pushed open the door to Mortimer's, the bell a lonely sound in the dark shop. Liam stood in the middle of the room, illuminated by the warm glow of a dozen strategically placed lanterns and a single, powerful work light connected to a rumbling generator out back. He was holding a flashlight in his mouth, trying to wrestle a new gas canister into the generator's port. He looked up, startled, as she entered, water pooling at her feet. For a long moment, they just stared at each other in the surreal, dancing light. She looked vulnerable, her usually perfect hair plastered to her forehead, her mascara slightly smudged. He looked capable and irritated. "What do you want, Gable?" he asked, his voice flat, the flashlight now in his hand. Elara took a shaky breath. "The power's out." Astounding powers of observation. My refrigeration," she began, hating the tremor in her voice. "I have hundreds of dollars worth of product that will spoil. I need to plug into your generator. Just for a few extension cords. I'll pay you for the gas." Liam almost laughed. The great Elara Gable, come to beg a favor from a Mortimer. This was a moment of supreme victory. He could say no. He should say no. It's what his father would have done. He looked at her, standing there in her soaked coat, her pride clearly warring with her desperation, and he saw not his rival, but the girl with the purple-stained smile. He sighed, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a profound weariness. "Fine," he said, the words surprising them both. "But you'll have to help me. This thing is a temperamental beast, and I need a third hand to get the new line connected. Can you hold a light without fainting from the indignity?" The request, the collaboration, was more shocking than the blackout. Silently, Elara nodded. For the next hour, in the storm-whipped darkness, the heirs to the pie feud worked side by side. Elara held the flashlight steady while Liam connected thick, orange extension cords. Their hands brushed again as they passed the cords back through the door. But this time, the jolt was followed by a strange, quiet acknowledgement. They didn't speak, save for terse, necessary instructions. "Hold it there. A little to the left. Pass me that wrench." When the cords were finally snaked across the wet street and into the Gable shop, and the hum of her coolers sputtered back to life, Elara felt a wave of relief so powerful it left her weak. She stood in her dark shop, the single work light casting long, strange shadows. Liam stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the lantern glow from his own shop, the rain still sheeting down behind him. "Thank you," Elara said, the words foreign on her tongue. Liam just nodded. "Don't mention it. Seriously. To anyone." And then he was gone, disappearing back into the flickering warmth of Mortimer's. Elara was left alone in the semi-darkness, the thrum of the generator a distant, alien heartbeat. The feud had always been black and white. Gables versus Mortimer's. Right versus wrong. Tradition versus chaos. But in the storm-lit collaboration, she had seen a glimpse of gray. She had seen competence in Liam's hands, and a reluctant honor in his decision to help. The foundation of her world, built upon generations of certain animosity, had developed its first hairline crack. The storm passed, the power returned, but nothing was the same. The memory of that night hung between Elara and Liam like a shared secret, a ghost in their daily rituals. The easy, comfortable hatred was gone, replaced by a confusing, tense curiosity. A few days later, Elara was going through the attic of the Gable shop, looking for old holiday decorations, when she found a box she'd never seen before. It was tucked behind her grandfather's old ledgers, a simple wooden chest, its lock rusted shut. Intrigued, she used a screwdriver to pry it open. Inside, beneath a layer of tissue paper that crumbled at her touch, was a leather-bound journal. The script on the front, faded and elegant, read, Elara Gable, Her Recipes and Musings. Elara was her great-grandmother, the matriarch who had founded the shop with her husband. Elara sat on the dusty floorboards, the afternoon light streaming through the single attic window, and began to read. It was mostly what she expected, lists of ingredients, notes on baking times. But then, tucked into the middle of the book, she found a loose, yellowed sheet of paper. The heading, written in a more frantic, flowing script, made her blood run cold. Alistair's favorite. For our anniversary. Alistair Mortimer. Liam's grandfather. Her heart hammering, she read the recipe. It was for a pear and ginger pie, but unlike anything the Gables had ever sold. It called for a splash of red wine, a dangerous amount of fresh ginger, and a streusel topping made with hazelnuts and brown sugar. It was bold, unconventional, and utterly Mortimer. Scrawled at the bottom, in the same ink, was a note. He says my laughter is the secret ingredient. I say it is the love we must never speak of. The world tilted. Elara Gable and Alistair Mortimer? A secret love? The feud, the one that had defined her entire life, was built on a lie? It wasn't about a stolen blue ribbon. It was about a forbidden romance that had ended, leaving behind two families forever locked in a performance of hatred to hide a much more painful truth. She couldn't breathe. She had to tell someone. The only person in the world who would understand the magnitude of this was the one person she was never supposed to talk to. That evening, as Liam was closing up, she saw him through the window, wiping down the counters. Taking the journal and clutching it to her chest like a shield, she crossed the street. She didn't hesitate this time. She walked right in. Liam looked up, startled. Gable? To what do I owe the? She thrust the journal at him, open to the recipe page. Read it. Puzzled, he took it. His eyes scanned the page, the familiar Mortimer name leaping out at him. He read the recipe, his brow furrowed. Then he saw the note at the bottom. The color drained from his face. He read it again, and then a third time, his knuckles white where he gripped the journal. This is a joke, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It's my great-grandmother's handwriting, Elara said, her own voice trembling. The feud, it was never about a pie contest. It was about them. Liam sank onto a stool, the journal resting on his knees. He looked up at Elara, his expression one of utter devastation. All his life, he'd been taught that the Gables were rigid, joyless, the enemy. And now he was learning that his own grandfather had loved one of them, that the very foundation of his family's identity was a reaction to a broken heart. My grandfather, Liam began. He was a bitter man after his wife died young. He never talked about anything before that, really. He just hated your family. I thought it was just business. So did I, Elara said softly. She looked around his shop, seeing it not as a den of the enemy, but as a place built by a man who was, perhaps, nursing a grief he could never share. In the quiet of the closed shop, surrounded by the lingering scent of sugar and spice, the last vestiges of the feud crumbled to dust. They weren't rivals anymore. They were accomplices. They were the sole inheritors of a tragic, beautiful secret. What do we do now? Elara asked. Liam looked at the recipe, then at her. A slow, determined light kindled in his eyes. We bake it, he said. They agreed to meet that night, after dark, in the neutral territory of Liam's kitchen. It felt illicit, a conspiracy. Elara brought the journal, and Liam gathered the ingredients. Ripe Bartlett pears, a knob of fresh ginger the size of his thumb, a bottle of good red wine. The air in the kitchen was thick with unspoken words and the profound strangeness of their collaboration. They worked around each other at first, a careful dance of avoiding touch. Elara, with her surgical precision, began peeling and coring the pears. Liam, with his intuitive flair, grated the ginger, its sharp, spicy scent filling the room. Why do you think it ended? Elara asked quietly, not looking up from her task. Liam poured the wine into a measuring cup. I don't know. Family pressure? The times. Maybe it was just too hard. Building a life together when their families were building walls between them. It's so sad, she murmured. To have to hide something like that. It's a waste, Liam said, his voice firm. A colossal, generational waste. He showed her the recipe's instruction for the streusel, which called for crushing the hazelnuts by hand with a rolling pin. It says it gives it a better texture than a food processor, he explained. Inefficient, Elara noted, but a small smile touched her lips. Sometimes the inefficient way is the best way, he countered, handing her the rolling pin. Their fingers touched. This time, neither of them pulled away. The contact was electric, but it was no longer a shock of animosity. It was a current of something else entirely: acknowledgement, understanding, and a spark of something warm and terrifyingly new. He didn't let go of the rolling pin, and she didn't release it. They stood there, in the warm light of the kitchen, holding on to opposite ends of a simple tool, their gazes locked. The world outside, the feud, the expectations, all of it faded into insignificance. In that suspended moment, they were just Liam and Elara, bound by a secret and the scent of pears and ginger. He was the one who broke the silence, his voice soft. "All those years, we were just playing parts, weren't we?" Elara nodded, her throat tight. "Parts written for us by a tragedy we knew nothing about." Slowly, he let go of the rolling pin. She placed it on the counter. The space between them vanished. He reached out his hand, a baker's hand, strong and capable, yet gentle, cupped her cheek. She leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a second. It felt like coming home. When he kissed her, it tasted of ginger and redemption. It was nothing like the sharp, competitive exchanges of their past. It was slow and searching and sweet, filled with the relief of laying down a burden they had both carried for far too long. It was the kiss that should have happened 2 generations ago. They finished the pie in a haze of newfound intimacy, their movements now synchronized, effortless. When it came out of the oven, it was magnificent. The crust was a perfect golden brown, the streusel topping craggy and inviting, the aroma an intoxicating blend of sweet fruit, spicy ginger, and deep, rich wine. They sat at a small table in the back of his shop and shared a slice while it was still warm. It was the best pie Elara had ever tasted. It was complex, layered, a little bit wild, and profoundly, deeply heartfelt. It was a pie with a soul. "It's not a Gable pie," she said. "It's not a Mortimer pie," he agreed. He took her hand. "It's our pie." The revelation couldn't stay a secret for long. Oakhaven was a small town, and the sudden, visible thaw between the 2 pie shop heirs was more noticeable than a marching band. They were seen having coffee together at the town square. Elara was spotted carrying a bag of flour from Mortimer's to her own shop. Liam was seen leaving the Gable bakery early one morning. The rumors flew, vicious and swift. "She's spying on him. He's trying to steal her recipes. It's a corporate merger." The older generation, the ones who had been weaned on the feud, were scandalized. Elara's aunt called her, voice trembling with betrayal. Liam's uncle sent him a long, angry email about dishonoring his father's memory. The pressure mounted, threatening to pull them apart. The weight of history, of expectation, was a formidable enemy. "Maybe this is a mistake," Elara said one night, her head on Liam's shoulder in his apartment above the shop. "The feud is easier. It's what everyone understands." Liam stroked her hair. "The feud is a lie, Elara. We have the proof. We have the pie. Are we really going to let a lie dictate the rest of our lives?" They knew they couldn't just quietly be together. They had to make a statement, a declaration, and they knew exactly how to do it. They decided to host a joint event, a taste of 2 families. It was brazen. It was revolutionary. They would sell slices from both shops side by side, and as the centerpiece, they would unveil the pear and ginger anniversary pie, selling it as a special, limited edition. The day of the event, the street was packed. It wasn't just curiosity that drew the crowd. It was the seismic shift in the town's very landscape. People lined up, their faces a mixture of confusion and excitement. Elara and Liam worked together, moving seamlessly between the 2 shops. They explained the history of their respective recipes with pride, not prejudice. And when they presented the shared pie, they told a story. Not the whole story. The secret of Eleanora and Alistair was theirs to keep. But a story of realizing that competition could breed excellence, but collaboration could breed magic. They sold out of everything in 2 hours. The anniversary pie was a sensation. But the real victory was the look on people's faces as they saw Elara Gable and Liam Mortimer laughing together, their hands brushing naturally, their bodies leaning into one another's space with an easy familiarity. The wall had been torn down, and in its place was a bridge. In the quiet aftermath, as they cleaned up together, the mayor approached them. "You know," he said, a twinkle in his eye, "you've given this old town something more interesting to talk about than a 50-year-old grudge. And that," he added, taking a last bite of the pear ginger pie, "is a slice of pure genius." 1 year later, there was still a Gable bakery and a Mortimer's Pies on Elm Street. But the dynamic had irrevocably changed. The competition was still there, but it was friendly, a playful rivalry that pushed them both to be better. Elara had introduced a line of Gable modern pies, incorporating some of Liam's bold flavor principles, but with her signature precision. Liam had created a Mortimer heritage line, mastering the classic, simple pies that were the Gable trademark, but with his characteristically perfect, rugged crust. And in the space between the two shops, they had built a shared patio, with tables and bright umbrellas. It was the most popular spot in Oakhaven. On any given day, you could see customers with a slice of Gable Supreme Apple on one plate and a slice of Mortimer's Cherry Balsamic Noir on another, happily comparing notes. Inside Mortimer's, now closed for the evening, Elara stood by the counter, a positive pregnancy test in her hand. She looked at Liam, who was kneading dough for the next day, a smudge of flour on his cheek. "Liam," she said softly. He looked up and she showed him the test. His eyes went wide, then filled with a joy so profound it made her own eyes well up. He crossed the room in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the shop that was no longer a fortress, but a home. "A Gable and a Mortimer," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "The feud ends for good." Elara laughed, a real, unburdened laugh that echoed in the warm, pie-scented air. "It already did," she said. "The day we chose a different recipe." On the counter, next to the proof of their future, sat the old, leather-bound journal, open to the page that had started it all. The secret ingredient they had discovered wasn't laughter or even love alone. It was the courage to break the mold, to throw out the old bitter recipe and, together, create something entirely new.